Hey there, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to show you a more advanced way of how you can paint the northern lights with watercolors. It's super fun and relaxing to paint, and I really hope you'll enjoy it. I've already taped down my loose sheet of 100% cotton watercolor paper to a canvas board to avoid paper buckling and also to be able to move the paper around later. But if you use a watercolor block, you can skip this part. First, you want to start out by distributing clean water all over your watercolor paper. For this step, I used a big flat brush and brushed over the paper multiple times back and forth to make sure the paper soaks up all the water as evenly as possible. This might take a while because the paper might need a little bit until it really soaked up all the water, but this preparation will give us additional time to paint wet into wet. And to add even more time, you can also apply water to the backside of the paper. This is especially helpful when it's hot where you are, or if you paint close to a radiator, your paper might dry faster as you like. So this trick can help you with that. Alright, now for the colors, I'm going to use only 3 colors: Phthalo green, Cerulean blue, and Indigo blue in tubes, so I can get as much pigment at once as possible. Now, before I begin applying paint to the paper, I quickly applied another layer of water on top of the paper just to make sure it has enough moisture in it. And then I tilted the board on the bottom side using my tape. This way the paint will flow downwards and help us create the northern lights. Alright, now to create the northern lights, I'm going to use a flat brush again, just slightly smaller than the previous one. This way it's easier to switch between thick and thin brush strokes and create the shapes we need for the lights. And I'm going to start with the lightest color first and then build up the darkness one step at a time. So for this step, I mix my phthalo green and cerulean blue colors together to create a more turquoise hue and then start distributing it starting at the top. The northern lights can always look different, so you can look up reference images that you like and follow the shape of the lights. Here, my design was slightly dramatic, so I started at the top and painted the first line slightly diagonally and slightly bent. This is going to be the lightest part. So I started with a thick line, and as I moved downwards towards the center, I made the line slightly thinner. I also played around with a few zigzag shapes just to mimic the shape of the northern lights. From there, I continued distributing the paint to all the areas where I wanted this color to shine through. On the bottom, I also wanted to add a road covered in snow, so here I also added a layer of the same blue color as the base for now. I also found that the painting looks more interesting when these lights meet somewhere on the side towards the horizon, so not just straight in the middle. But you can play around with any designs you like. It's your painting after all. Once you apply the lightest color, it's time to build up the darkness. For this step, I mixed in some of my indigo blue to my previous mix of color and then applied it in between the blue areas. Again, I switched between thick and thin brush strokes to add variety and movement to the painting. Don't forget that the paint still moves and there will be weird looking stages throughout this process, but remember to push through those moments and to not give up on your painting too early. As you can see, I keep distributing the dark blue paint in between those lighter areas. I also try to keep the top part of the painting darker than the lower half, as here the area is the brightest part of the whole painting, plus I still want to add some trees and a road as well. If the lower half would be too dark, all these details won't be visible as much. But to make sure the road doesn't distract too much, I added some darker paint to the very bottom part. So the focus is really on the brightest part of the northern light and its reflection around the horizon. I also used the same dark blue color and outlined the horizon where I wanted to add my trees and added the lines in the road. So it will look like someone already drove over the street that is covered in snow. Now you want to continue building up the darkest areas. Remember that watercolors look a lot lighter when dry, so add more pigment than you think you need right from the beginning. Otherwise, the painting will look too pale in the end. Once you've applied enough pigment, you can start adding a few highlights using the lifting technique. For this step, I used my flat brush, made sure it's clean, and then I went over a few areas to soak up some of the pigments where I wanted to add a little bit of highlights. And whenever you lift off some of the paint, make sure to clean your brush again and to soak up any excess moisture using your paper towel. We don't want to add any water to the painting. So here, for example, I didn't want the lines to be just wavy lines disappearing towards the horizon, so I decided to add some swirly details. As you can see, I added this swirly line around the horizon and then lifted off some of the paint moving towards this part. But I also wanted to add a few more highlights here and there by lifting more paint around the brighter blue color, just to add some more magic and variation to the northern lights. If the paper is still wet, you can add a little bit more pigment to make some areas even darker, but you also don't want to overdo it. Once you've applied the paint and created a few highlights, let the paint completely dry. To speed up the drying process, you can also use a hairdryer. Once the paint has dried, we can add some details. As you can see, after everything is dry, the paint doesn't look as weird as in the beginning, right? Now for my painting, I wanted to add some trees next to the road that disappear towards the horizon, but you can also create mountains or something like that. So for this step, I used my round brush with a fine tip and the leftover paint that I had in my mixing palette. I started with a straight line and then I dabbed on the paint in a zigzag motion as I moved my way down to the bottom of the tree. The farther the trees, the smaller they should be. So the closer and closer I painted the trees, the taller I made them look. I also made the color slightly lighter around the horizon and darker the closer the trees were to the viewer. Now, because I didn't want the trees to stand out that much, because I felt like there was too much contrast between the dark trees and the bright snowy road, I went ahead and blended out the paint with clean water. Now, because I still felt the street is way too bright in the foreground, I decided to darken this area a little bit more by adding a little bit of indigo blue, and then I blended it towards the horizon. I just didn't want the street to distract from the sky too much. And then I let everything completely dry. Now, as the last step, let's add some stars and snow to the painting. For this step, I mixed white gouache with water to make the consistency more watery, and then I tapped on the brush to sprinkle the paint all over the painting. You can also add a little bit of blue paint to the mix to make the color slightly more bluish, and sprinkle that to the lower half of the painting as well. This will look like the snow is reflecting the blue light from the sky. Now we just need to remove the tape and we're done. And this is how it looks. A little bit of realism and a little bit of fantasy. Don't forget, if you want to get started with watercolor painting or need some fun painting ideas, my watercolor book is officially available for pre-order. For more info about it, check out the link in the description box down below. I really hope you liked this video and find it helpful. Thank you so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!